The New Testament scholar and professor for decades at Union Seminary named Walter Wink tells a story that happened right after World War II. There's a story of a couple, a married couple who were Christians who went to Poland. They went there to meet with a group of Polish Christians on a peacemaking mission. Their goal was to see if this group of Polish Christians would be willing to start up a dialogue with Christians in Germany. Now, again, this is right after World War II, and they know that this is a huge, immense thing that they are asking of these Christians in Poland. Poland has just seen 5 million of their own citizens, 5 million men, women, and children killed during World War II and the Holocaust. 3 million of them alone were killed in ghettos and in concentration camps by Germans. This is an unfathomable number. I can't even imagine 5 million killed and 3 million murdered in concentration camps. It's such a big, big thing that they're asking just to start talking with the Christians in Germany. But this couple, these Christian peacemakers, they go anyway, believing that God's kingdom is one of reconciliation, believing that God's kingdom is one of confessing our sins, one of facing the pain of the past and the present, but then one of offering God's grace, one of seeking healing and wholeness through forgiveness. So they go, hoping and praying that God will somehow show up in some way during their visit to do what seems absolutely impossible. When this couple get to Poland, they share with these Polish Christians the question they want to ask. They say to them, would you be willing to meet with some Christians from West Germany? These Christians want to ask you for forgiveness. They want to ask you for forgiveness for what Germany did during the war, and they want to begin a new relationship with you. Would you meet with them? These Polish Christians hear their question, but they don't say anything right away. There's this long pause in silence as these Polish Christians just stare back at this couple. Finally, the leader of this Polish Christian steps forward and he says to them, what you ask is impossible. Every stone of Warsaw is soaked with Polish blood that they, the German Christians, spilled. We cannot forgive. The peacemakers understand. This was a big, big ask, and now may not be the right time. So they spend the night there, and the next day they're about to leave, and they ask this group of Polish Christians if they'll gather with them in one closing prayer. And of course, the Polish Christians agree to do that. And they get in a big circle, and they kneel down, and they pray. And as they close in prayer, they invite everyone to say in unison the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father. And so they start to say out loud, all of them together, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and then they all stop. They can't continue on. There's another very long pause this time as this couple are looking around, wondering if the Polish Christians are going to continue, wondering if maybe something was wrong with saying this prayer together. Finally, that same Polish Christian who yesterday said, what you are asking is absolutely impossible. Every stone of our city is soaked in blood because of them. That same Polish Christian speaks up. And he says, I must say yes to your request. I must say yes because if I don't forgive, I can no longer pray the Lord's Prayer. I can no longer call myself God's child if I don't forgive. Humanly speaking, I can't do it, but God will give me the strength. A year and a half later, those Polish Christians met with a group of Christians from Germany in Vienna. They heard their confession. They shared their own pain and hurt and shared this was going to be a hard and long process. But they offered them what grace and forgiveness they could, and they said, we want to stay in relationship and in dialogue with you. And they kept on meeting. They started this new relationship that seemed impossible to renew. I love this story, and if you've been here before, you've probably heard me tell it multiple times because it's such a great and powerful story. But I'm reminded of it specifically this week because it's also what Jesus is saying to us in our passage. Jesus is reminding us that a core part of our life as followers of Jesus is not just in receiving forgiveness and grace, something we all need every single day, but also a core part of our life in following Jesus is in forgiving others too. Forgiving debts, forgiving money, forgiving things that are owed, forgiving wrongs that have been done, forgiving hurt, forgiving grudges, forgiving even sins. This is something we as Christ followers are called to do, both when it may come somewhat easy, but also when it might be a really, really hard ask. As the Polish Christian said, I can no longer call myself God's child if I don't forgive. Jesus says the same thing to us today. When Peter asks him, Lord, how often should I forgive? Peter is asking some simple number, some simple thing to say, well, if I forgive this many times, am I then going to earn God's forgiveness? Can I pay back that debt God's forgiven me? What's the final amount? When can I finally get back to saying, no, I won't forgive you. You must pay what you have done. That's what Peter's asking. And so he says, well, 2 or 3 times, that's a lot. If you've ever forgiven someone 2 or 3 times, you know that's a lot. And Peter goes one up more than that and says, well, how about 7? Surely Jesus can't make it more than 7. That's a lot of times to forgive one person. But Jesus says back, not even a real number. He doesn't say 2 or 3 or 7 or 10. He says a number that's beyond even counting. He says in our translation 77, but others say 7 times 70. And what Jesus is really saying is not 490 and that 491st time, then you can stop. Jesus is really saying, don't even count. What you're even asking isn't the right question. There isn't some limit that we get to, and then we can say, well, now I can stop living into forgiveness. Instead, Jesus tells a story that reframes the whole question. Jesus tells a story about a man who owes more than a lifetimes of money, more than really 10,000 lifetimes of money. 10,000 talents is 10,000 years worth of wages if you don't spend any money on yourself at all. It's an impossible amount. It's an amount none of us can ever repay. Jesus is reminding us all that God has given us so freely, not just forgiveness from what we've done wrong, but simple gifts that we take far too often for granted. Gifts like our very lives. Gifts like our world around us, our family, our friends, this ground we walk on, this air we breathe, this joy in knowing that we are alive and that we have this day to live. We can't ever pay back God for that. We can't ever say, well, God, you made me and created me and gave me all this, but now we're even. We're never going to get to that moment. And yet, we live in a world that tells us that we should live as people who keep strict accounts. Our world tells us that if someone owes you anything, make sure they pay you back with interest and punish them if they don't. Our world tells us if someone has done you wrong, hurt them back in the same way they hurt you. Our world tells us to not see people as full children of God, full of infinite value and worth on their own, but instead to see them as ledgers on a bank account, to see them as numbers, to see them as what they can be for you. If they've done good for you, well, yeah, you can do something good for them, but if they hurt you or if they've left something not given back to you, well, then you hurt them back. Then you make them pay. We live in a world that far too often is all about what's mine, what am I owed, what do I deserve? What did that person do for me and to me? That's the way of the world. It's very much all about me. And if we're honest, we know that we still at times, as followers of Christ, live that way. What am I earned? What do I deserve? What did that person do to me, and how can I pay them back? How can I make them pay for it? But Jesus offers us a different way to live. Jesus offers us a life where each person is seen as fully good in themselves, as full of value and worth. Jesus invites us into a life not of hoarding and accumulating and demanding, this is mine, but in offering grace and forgiveness, and sharing goodness and love and mercy, even when that person may not fully deserve it, because we've received it when we haven't fully deserved it ourselves. It's a way of life that moves us from thinking all about me and what can I get, to thinking about you and us and what's good for all of us together. In this way of life, Jesus says, maybe most challenging is not optional for us as Christians. It's not as if we can receive grace and forgiveness and then say, well, today I don't feel like forgiving, or that forgiveness is for other people, it's not for me. No, Jesus says that forgiving others is a core part of what it means to be a follower of Christ. If we refuse to forgive, Jesus says even more, then we will not know the full grace and kingdom of God. Earlier in Matthew, when he teaches the disciples the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, he closes by saying, if you forgive others, then God will forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, God will not forgive you. Jesus says, if you don't offer forgiveness, you will be left out of the party of God's kingdom. The British New Testament scholar N.T. Wright puts forgiveness this way. He says, forgiveness isn't like a Christmas present that a kindly grandfather can go ahead and give to a sulky grandchild, even if that grandchild hasn't given a single gift to anyone else. We sometimes think of forgiveness that way, but that's not how God's forgiveness works. Instead, he says forgiveness is more like the air in your lungs. There's only room for you to inhale the next lungful when you've just breathed out the previous one. If you insist on withholding it in, if you insist on closing your lips and puckering up your cheeks and not breathing out, you can't ever breathe it back in. If you insist on refusing to give someone else the kiss of life they may desperately need in forgiveness, then you won't be able to take any more in yourself. I find this image of forgiveness being like air we breathe very helpful. It reminds me that forgiveness is not like a ledger or a bank account or something we can even keep track of or count of. But instead, forgiveness should be like air. It should become so much a part of our daily lives that we lose all track of how much we've been forgiven and how much we forgive others. It should become something that becomes so full of our lives that it's just part of who we are. And we do it without even fully thinking. We've all got some work to do to make forgiveness that core and that key to our lives. Forgiveness doesn't come always easy or naturally to us. It takes some work. It takes some practice. But it's what we need. Like air, forgiveness is both what we need to often take in, but also what we need to give to others, to let out and share with the world. So I want to invite us to do a practice right now. Whether you are here in the sanctuary or at home watching online, I want you to find a comfortable way of sitting, whatever is most comfortable for you, and then I want you to put your hands with your palms straight up like this. If it's helpful to rest it on an armrest or your legs or whatever is comfortable, don't make it so it's a strain or you're thinking about it, but just your palms up. And then I invite you to close your eyes. And as you close your eyes, I want you to take a deep breath in. You take a deep breath with me in. And then I want you to release that breath with a deep breath out. Let's do that again. Deep breath in. Deep breath out. And this time, as you take this deep breath in, I want you to think these words in your head. Lord, forgive me. So let's do that. Deep breath in. Lord, forgive me. And then, as you take a deep breath out, I want you to think these words: as I forgive others. Deep breath out. As I forgive others. Let's do that again. Deep breath in. Lord, forgive me. Deep breath out. As I forgive others. This time I'm just going to say deep breath in and invite you to think those words. Deep breath in. Deep breath out. Deep breath in. Deep breath out. Deep breath in. Deep breath out. As Iris comes up and plays our next song for us, I invite you to either, if you'd like, continue doing that breath prayer, saying each time you breathe in, Lord, forgive me, and each time you breathe out, as I forgive others. Or I invite you to take a moment and ponder this question for this week. And that question is this. And if you can put it up on the screen, Dan. Reflection question. And the question is, how can I practice forgiveness in my own life? It doesn't need to be as big or grand, at least seeming to you, as what those Polish Christians did. Maybe it's a grudge that you've been holding against someone, those hard feelings, and letting those hard feelings go. Maybe it's a family member or a friend who you haven't spoken to in a while because they said something hurtful, and it may take you doing the job of reaching out. Maybe there's someone who actually owes you some money and can't pay right now, and maybe you just say to them, don't worry about it. Your debt's forgiven. Maybe there's someone in need of help or some assistance, and you give it to them absolutely freely, not asking anything back. Whatever it is, trust that it's not a small thing when you do it. That in God's eyes, it's a huge thing. And that when you start this practice of forgiveness, you keep doing it. Just like after that first breath, we keep on breathing. With that first step of forgiveness, Christ moves in us, and we're able to live more and more and more deeply into this new way of grace. Let's take a moment to reflect and listen for how God's moving in our lives.